Welcome back to News in Focus. Now, on Monday, Brics members held an emergency meeting to, of course, deal with the high tariffs by US President Donald Trump. India urged Brics members to address their trade imbalances with New Delhi as the bloc, as mentioned, rallied against US President Donald Trump's tariffs that have unnerved Washington's friends and foes alike. Meanwhile, here in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa urged Brics to finalize an economic strategy aimed at strengthening trade and investment among the bloc's countries as a way to counteract rising protectionism and global economic uncertainty. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome Dr. Ruediger Theiselmann, who is an editor of Board Journal, lawyer and board advisor, and is a long-term participant at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He's no stranger to us here on Hilaal TV. Dr. Theiselmann, always good having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patel. Good to see you.
No, absolute pleasure. Dr. Theiselmann, I just wanted to get one quick question. It's a report that I saw this morning by the Financial Times. So the US, quoting unnamed sources, they have said that they've asked the European Union to slap a 100% tariffs on China and India. I just wanted to get your initial reaction to that.
I mean, this is clearly what we have seen over the last couple of weeks. This is the so-called secondary tariff, which is, or which would, if it comes to that, be a big burden in terms of the relationship between the European Union and China, because both sides very much depend on each other. However, I don't assume that this is likely to become reality because, as mentioned, we are now in a phase where we are talking about negotiations and about tactics. So let's see what comes out of that.
The meeting that happened on Monday, how impactful was the message from all of those leaders aimed at US President Trump with regards to these tariff hikes? Because, of course, when you see what's happening with India, they've been hit with quite high tariff hikes, over 50% due to the purchasing of Russian oil. China has been hit with high tariff hikes. Right here in South Africa, 31%. They're trying to reduce that. So I just want to get your take on the message and the impact of it.
It was symbolically powerful, but tactically limited. The statement signaled collective pushback and helped frame the tariffs as a systemic risk to global growth. Yet it didn't alter Washington's near-term calculus, where it had abide was in coordinating responses, diversifying supply chains, setting more trade in local currencies, and signaling willingness to retaliate in a measured, unified way. Brics leaders, that's what I see, their collective messages to Donald Trump regarding tariff hikes underscore their unified opposition to protectionist measures that disrupt global trade flows. By publicly addressing the US administration tariff policies, Brics aims to highlight the adverse effects these actions have not only on their individual economies, but also on the broader international system. The impact of these messages lies in signaling to the global community that major economies are prepared to coordinate responses and advocate for more equitable, rules-based trade. And while the direct influence on US policy may be limited, such unified communication puts diplomatic pressure on Washington and encourages other nations to resist unilateral actions.
President Ramaphosa here in South Africa said that the seismic shifts in global trade presented both challenges and opportunities in the reordering of the global economy. Of course, we speak about these seismic shifts that could happen, but has Brics got the ability to go ahead and actually make this happen in today's economy?
They have partial capacity, not full leverage. Brics can shape standards, finance infrastructure, and deepen the so-called South-South trade, especially via development banks, currency swap lines, and cross-border payments. But execution depends on internal alignment, as we all know. Fragmentation inside the bloc is the main brake on turning vision into policy. President Ramaphosa has articulated concerns about the increasing fragmentation of global trade, attributing much of the instability to rising protectionism and unilateral decision-making by major economies. He has emphasized the importance of Brics as a platform for emerging markets to advocate for reforms in the global economic architecture. And Ramaphosa believes that Brics can exert meaningful influence by championing multilateral solutions, promoting the South-South cooperation, and pushing for greater representation and fairness in international institutions. He sees Brics as both a counterbalance to unipolar dominance and as a catalyst for more inclusive global economy. Ramaphosa also recognize the dramatic changes shaping global trade. Brics, as a coalition of influential economies, has the potential to drive new trade frameworks and influence the global economic order. However, realizing this potential depends on the group's ability to overcome internal differences and act cohesively. While Brics has the resources and also the market size to initiate change, practical implementation requires sustained collaboration, strategic alignment, and effective negotiation with other global players.
You speak of negotiation, Dr. Theiselmann. Ramaphosa also mentioned that there needs to be a demonstration on how consensus is built through that very same median and not through cohesion. This is Donald Trump we are talking about. Can this actually happen, especially when it comes to trade?
Indeed, Ramaphosa's emphasis on negotiation over coercion contrasts sharply with President Trump's more transactional approach to trade. While consensus building is essential for stable international relations, Trump's preference for leverage and pressure makes traditional negotiation challenging from my perspective. Nevertheless, if both sides perceive mutual benefit and are willing to compromise, negotiation can occur. The process would likely to be complex and require third-party mediation or incentives to ensure genuine dialogue. From my perspective, the path is therefore transactional. Narrow sector-specific deals, clear enforcement, and optics that show reciprocity. Brics leaders can reduce friction by offering concrete market access or investment pledges while keeping a coalition in reserve if talks stall.
Dr. Theiselmann, the tariff hike on India, I found to be quite surprising because Modi has been really trying to cozy up towards Donald Trump. My question is, how much has India's hand been forced into this, given the tensions that have arose due to the purchasing of oil from Russia?
Well, US tariff hikes lead to challenges for India's export-driven sectors, increase costs and reduce competitiveness. In terms of energy, India's continued oil purchases from Russia represent a pragmatic response to ensure energy security and stable prices amid global volatility. However, these purchases expose India to potential secondary sanctions or further tariff actions from the US, complicating its foreign policy calculus. India has sought to balance its strategic autonomy with the need to maintain constructive relations with both Washington and Moscow, advocating for exemptions and seeking diplomatic solutions where possible. Indeed, the tariff hike targeting India was unexpected, in particular given Prime Minister Modi's previously amicable relationship with Donald Trump. The move has placed India in a difficult position, compelling it to reconsider its trade and energy policies. India's purchase of oil from Russia, amidst rising geopolitical tensions, forced its hand as it sought to balance national interests with maintaining favorable ties with the United States. Ultimately, India's response also demonstrates the complex challenges faced by countries navigating overlapping alliances and economic priorities. New Delhi is currently balancing strategic autonomy with US alignment. Energy security and discounted Russian barrels gave India short-term gains, but in the long run, the exposure to secondary pressure is there, and the tariff narrows India's leeway for maneuver. Yet India will hedge rather than pivot, diversify crude sources, court US supply chains, and keep energy purchases flexible. That's my perception.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Dr. Theiselmann. This discussion of a multipolarity has been on the cards for such a long time. Can what we see now in terms of these tariff hikes lead to this happening through the Brics nations? My conversation continues after the break. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Dr. Ruediger Theiselmann. As always, Dr. Theiselmann, thank you so much for joining us. He's coming to us from Frankfurt in Germany. Dr. Theiselmann, Brazilian President Lula da Silva spoke about this quote-unquote trade blackmail. And in your view, how has the U.S. created this blackmail, as mentioned by da Silva, enforcing these tariff hikes, especially on the Brics nations?
President Lula's reference to trade blackmail reflects mounting frustration among some Brics and Global South leaders with what they perceive as the U.S. leveraging its economic power to extract concessions or dictate terms. By threatening or enacting tariff hikes, the United States can pressure nations to alter their policies or alliances to align with its interests. This approach is seen as coercive, undermining fair competition and multilateral dialogue in favor of unilateral advantage. From Brics' perspective, it shows up as a so-called linkage diplomacy. Access to US markets or finance conditioned on security or energy choices, plus the threat of secondary sanctions. The lever isn't just tariffs. It's control over the US dollar system, export controls, and regulatory scrutiny that raises the cost of non-alignment.
Dr. Theiselmann, China's role. I'm sure you saw last week when they had this military parade. Russian President Vladimir Putin was there, Kim Jong-un of North Korea was there. One would have thought that the Americans would have been slightly concerned. They may just be slightly concerned with regards to that. But this trade tension between Washington and Beijing remains at an all-time high. In your view, what is China's role in terms of this? Because there doesn't seem to be some sort of middle ground that is happening between these two powerhouses.
China plays a central role in the current trade tension, serving both as a key Brics member and a principal target of US tariffs. The ongoing friction between Washington and Beijing exacerbates global economic uncertainty and impacts supply chains worldwide. China's response, whether through countermeasures or diplomatic measures or engagement, influences not only its own economy, but also the broader dynamics within the Brics and the international trade. China is both anchor and lightning rod. It provides scale, market demand, capital, and manufacturing depth, helping Brics absorb shocks. But its competition with Washington, with the United States, also sharpens scrutiny on any Brics initiative. So Beijing's ability to keep a lower profile and empower others in the bloc often determines how far collective projects can go.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said that he would like to see harsher tariffs on countries purchasing Russian oil. How much of that sticking point has come down to that purchasing of oil? Because, again, just like Washington and Beijing, very similar tensions are rising between Washington and Moscow, even though President Trump and President Putin, met each other in Alaska a few weeks ago. I beg your pardon.
That's the core sticking point because it's easy to monitor and politically salient. Energy flows intersect with sanctions, shipping insurance, and price caps, making them the cleanest access for pressure. And countries that rely on discounted Russian oil and they face a predictable menu: higher tariff risk, tighter financial compliance, and also reputational costs. Secretary Bessent's call for stricter tariffs on countries buying Russian oil underscores the intersection of energy policy and geopolitics. The primary sticking point is the US intent to limit Russia's economic influence and revenue using tariffs as a deterrent. Countries that continue to purchase Russian oil may face increased pressure as the US seeks to isolate Russia economically while also safeguarding its own strategic interests.
Yeah, and of course, many of the BRICS nations are still purchasing that very same oil from Russia. Dr. Theiselmann, I mean, 2 years ago when the BRICS summit was being held in Johannesburg here in South Africa, this multilateralism, unipolarity has been the themes, the words that have been thrown around. I mean, 2 years later, we practically the world's none the better in terms of achieving both of that at this very moment. In your view, can the world see this change in terms of trade? Should these ideas be pushed? I ask this because obviously, as we speak, the US holds the cards in terms of tariff hikes, in terms of trade. But has the BRICS nations got the ability to go ahead and change all of this?
It has. It can, incrementally. If more trade clears in non-dollar currencies, if standards are co-written in new forums, and if development finance offers real alternatives, bargaining power redistributes, we can expect in future a more modular system, regional compacts, multiple payment rails, parallel rulemaking, rather than a single dramatic break from the existing order. That's something we should not expect. BRICS advocacy for multilateralism and opposition to a unipolar global order could reshape international trade structures if these ideas gain traction. By promoting inclusive, cooperative frameworks, BRICS nations aim to reduce the dominance of any single country and encourage fairer, more balanced economic relations. If this proves to be successful, this shift could foster new alliances, diversify trade partnerships, and mitigate the risk of protectionism. The effectiveness of such changes very much depends on the willingness of global stakeholders to embrace multilateral principles and also reform existing institutions. And that's my view. This will be surely a lengthy and complex exercise.
Dr. Theiselmann, always good having you, and thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
You're welcome. Great pleasure, Mr. Patel.
That's Dr. Ruediger Theiselmann. He's an editor of the Port Journal, lawyer, board advisor, and also a long-time participant of the World Economic Forum in Davos. I actually remember Minister Gwede Mantashe when the portfolio at the time was the Mineral Resources and Energy Department. At the time, South Africa, we were paying quite high petrol costs, and the Russia and Ukraine war had started, and of course said in Parliament, maybe we should consider buying oil from Russia. At the moment, of course, South Africa purchases oil from various nations, of course, but I mean, the purchasing of oil from Russia would have been quite a sticky point if it was exclusively being purchased from Russia. What would it have been now, given if this comments from Scott Bessent proved to be a prophetic one? Interesting how this goes ahead, because just when that military parade had happened, next year's G20 summit, you had US President Donald Trump saying, I'd love to have President Putin and President Xi Jinping coming to Miami for that G20 summit. Interesting how all of this is going to unfold. But if the BRICS nations are to find a way to move on from the Donald Trump tariffs and somehow find to trade with themselves as BRIC nations and still have enough in terms of their respective GDPs and revenues, it's going to be a difficult one for the USA to try and navigate. Well, that's all we have for you here on News in Focus. If you've missed today's episode, you will be sure to find it on our YouTube channel. From myself, Ras Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.